Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. Welcome to this F&O, or Finance and Supply Chain Management user group here with Turnkey Technologies. Today we have our consultant, Charles Adams. He's going to walk through some new features, year-end closing processes, etc. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it off to Charles.
All right, thank you, Luke. I'll go ahead and share my screen here. Yep, yeah, so the goal of today's meeting was to go over the cash flow forecasting and D365. We'll also kind of be going over the year-end process at the end, just to go over high level how that process works, and yeah. So kind of the goal of today's meeting is just to bring awareness to these features, right? Bring awareness to the cash flow forecasting, and then also just awareness of how you can do, a year-end close as we get into December here. That's the goal of the meeting, and hopefully we achieve that. So the first thing for cash flow forecasting, it seems to be more of an underutilized feature. We don't see a lot of people using it, and it can be kind of powerful, and that's why we want to bring awareness to this. So basically, just a high-level overview of kind of how the cash flow forecasting works is it's in their cash and bank module in D365. And essentially it works by seeing all of our submodules throughout D365, and seeing where you can have cash flowing in or cash flowing out. That can be from your budget, your project forecast, your inventory forecast, etc. Or it could be from maybe an external source, like an external sales forecast, etc. It doesn't all have to be in D365. So I'm sharing my screen here, and I'll just go ahead and go to the cash and bank module. So right here, there's the cash flow forecasting, and I'm just going to go into this kind of the setup to display, what it is I'm, talking about here. So here's all the different modules that kind of go into creating your cash flow forecast and your cash position forecast. So the first thing is our general ledger. What are our liquidity accounts? What bank accounts are we going to be using? What bank accounts are all their cash, and do we need to be watching for? So another thing too is we can have dependent accounts. So these are dependent on certain variables. An example might be sales tax or something, sales tax payable. That's reliant on the more you sell, that's going to go up. So you need to make sure that that's included in your forecast. So that's kind of a basic setup for your general ledger. Now getting into kind of the different modules that can impact the forecast. Obviously, AP and AR are going to be our two main ones. Right. So essentially, what it does is it looks at all your outstanding POs, and it looks at stuff like, okay, our requested delivery date is November 15th, and for this particular vendor, they generally are going to send an invoice maybe with that delivery, and they have a terms of payment of 10, so it's going to estimate the cash flow based off that. So this is kind of a high level. These are just defaults, but we can get down to the granularity of the actual vendor group for each particular vendor. Another thing to note here is the vendor posting profiles. So if you do have different bank accounts for specific vendors and you want to watch that specific bank account, You know, that's included in our setup here. Yeah. So kind of moving on to the accounts receivable, it's going to be the same concept, right? So, you know, we have a requested shipping date. We're invoicing, you know, around the same time, and we're expecting, you know, payment from that customer within about 30 days to our specific liquidity account, etc., bank account really. And then we can also divide this by customer group so we can get that more accurate. And finally, you know, if you are receiving into a different account, you can define that down here in our liquidity. So that's kind of the basic setup, right? You know, our basic outflows and inflows that everything ultimately comes down to if you want to do the basic setup. The other thing too is where it can get kind of, you know, powerful is including our other modules in D365. So if you're using a budgeting, if you're using budgeting, for example, for, you know, the upcoming year, and you'd like to include that forecast into your cash flow forecast for the following, you know, 13 months, then you can say to, okay, well, we want to, you know, compare how does this affect our budget register entries. How does this affect our cash flow for, you know, 2025, for example? So again, you don't really necessarily have to, but it's helpful if you're using those modules. The other thing is inventory management. So for example, if you're using some sort of demand forecasting, and you'd like to include that in your cash flow forecast, you can do that. You know, typically you want to kind of use I've set up right here a reduction model. So if I click in here, basically what this does is it reduces that forecast. So as these, you know, orders get firmed in the accounts payable module, or if they're for, you know, selling particular items, you don't want to double count those, right? So you want to reduce. It's probably best to use a reduction model, unless maybe you're doing a year-end process, or you're looking at the next year. It just kind of depends on how you're using that. Again, this is optional. You don't have to include this. It's just there if you'd like. Some people aren't even using the inventory demand forecast, but it's an option. So this is included also with project management. It's going to be the same concept. If you can define, you know, what type of projects do you have set up in project management and accounting that are do you want to include in the forecast. So for example, if you're doing you know, I don't know, an asset, if you're creating a new asset, and you know, there's materials you're buying, if you're building something internally, you want to obviously track those costs and how it affects your cash. So we can include that here. Again, the project forecast model, I have it set for reduction, but you know, so you can create lots of different forecasts here and apply those to these projects, and rerun your cash flow with, you know, different, maybe, you know, projects forecast costs. So you know, maybe create multiple project forecast models where there's you know, lots of items that need to be procured, and you're expecting that. Then you can create a project forecast for that, and rerun cash flow forecasting with that specific forecast for projects. So that's something to kind of think about as well. And then finally, another thing to note is external sources. So say you're not, not using projects, you're not using, demand forecasting or any master planning or anything, or budgeting for that matter. You just you're just using Dynamics for, GL, AP, AR. Yeah, we can set those up in external sources. We can have those, we can set up categories, and then using the data management framework, we can open in Excel and enter in some of these transactions to include in a forecast. So that's kind of something to note here. I know that's sometimes come up a good amount. Finally, financial dimensions, if you're not aware what financial dimensions are, they're basically just kind of the ledger entry. So we have, our main accounts in D365, and then we have financial dimensions on top of those main accounts to further, segment transaction costs. If you want to see a particular business unit, you can select that here, etc. So because there's constant changing, and transactions being created in your system every day, from purchase orders to sales orders to item cost, or new new transactions and projects if you're using that, etc. There's a cash flow forecast automation framework, and essentially it's a batch job that runs daily. So this kind of keeps your data live and more up to date. So you can have this run every day at a set time, and that way you don't need to configure this and you can see kind of in real time almost what your expected cash balances will be. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and run one right now. You can set this up to be recurring. I'm going to go ahead and just run one. A one-off. I'm going to run total because this is a demo environment. We do not have much transaction data, but if you're going to run this every day, you would do a new, and it really would only include these new transactions that are occurring in your system. So once that runs, and it already has run, there's really 3 workspaces that D365 has. This last one is really part of more of the new financial insights feature. That's a little bit outskip for today, but essentially it's a new feature that allows AI, a new machine learning, to get more accurate predictions on your inflows and outflows. For example, in the accounts receivable, it might say terms of 30 days you receive payment, but you have a particular vendor who they have a history of paying on a few days late or a few days early or sometimes really late. And it can kind of take that into account based off a historical record of that particular vendor's transactions, or maybe you have so that it can kind of increase the accuracy of your forecast. And if you are interested in doing the financial insights, that is a power. If I'll just go to this LCS, that is a Power Platform integration. It's an app that you can add. These first 2 are just out of box embedded reports. So I'll just go to a cash overview for all companies. These are embedded Power BI reports, so you don't have to build them. They're just out of the box. All that's really required is just setting up the integration with a Power BI desktop account. So I have all of our companies showing right now. Essentially, this will just give you overview and a forecasted overview. You can select the dates. So for example, this is going all the way back, but we can change the advanced filtering and say, after a particular date. So this will show kind of, all our transactions that are coming up with our graphs here. We have a daily forecast summary. Another thing to note here is you can always export these. If you export them, it'll export to an Excel. So we can just do current layout, and it'll export simply to an Excel sheet. I'm gonna go back in here to my current company. Again, so this is just going to show kind of a graphical interface. We have our outflows and our inflows, and then our cash balance, and that's coming from outstanding POs, outstanding SOs. If you are including demand forecasts, etc., it can include those. We'll have our daily forecast summary here on the top left, and then in more detail, your forecast details down here with the specific actual transactions, etc. And again, you can always export this to an Excel if you'd like. So these workspaces are just Power BI embedded workspaces that are come with the regular D365 Finance. So I'm going to go into the cash flow forecast workspace here. Change this to weekly. So this will show you, your cash position. I've set it to weekly here. You can change it daily, monthly, and it'll give a summary, and then it'll also show your actual the transactions down here that it's pulling that data from. So if I go to so on the top here you can see it's grouped by our cash on hand, and then our cash inflows, and then all of our outflows for each particular period. We can, I'm set to weeks right now, but you can click into these. So we have a lot of customer open transactions, demo data, and it will show, okay, where are all these coming from? If I go to the this cash flows, so this will so I've selected weekly up here, and it'll show our net change between weeks, and then also our balance, and then also the inflows and outflows between each. Another thing we can do is the actual we can create something called snapshots. So you can create as many snapshots as you want of certain scenarios. So if I go to here, just some examples of, so say you want to set up maybe an optimistic, pessimistic, and normal. You can then compare those with your actuals as you go through the financial year. Basically, it'll tell you the variance. It'll say, this is your expected actual for this week, and this is what was forecasted in this snapshot that you're looking at. So another thing kind of big here is the external data. So we can add external data to our forecast to include using the data management framework. So I'm just gonna edit existing external data because we should have some actually in there already. So if you're not familiar with the Excel add-in, this is kind of can be used anywhere in the system. It's a really helpful tool that is probably, the theme today is underutilized features. I would say the Excel add-in is probably one of the most underutilized features, but essentially we can download the entity in D365 to Excel. Just gonna say enable editing. So here's our Excel add-in. Yeah, so what it'll do is it'll just basically transcribe that entity that we were in the live environment with into Excel, and then I can just enter in to the fields in Excel, and then I can publish this back to D365. So here's some examples of stuff that was already there. So say I wanted to add, you have an external sheet that is creating that's for projects that aren't being tracked in this particular system. What I can do is take that Excel sheet and then basically transcribe it onto here, and then I can just publish that data so it'll show up in my future cast positions forecast. So I'm just going to add a few lines here. I'll just copy and paste. Another thing too that's kind of nice about the Excel add-in is it's going to show if there are not free text fields. It'll actually show the data you're choosing from, so you don't have to worry about format, etc. I'll just kind of doing an example of the entry for this. Again, those categories are coming from that setup. So it defines whether it's an inflow or outflow transaction. I'm gonna try and publish this. And we have some duplicate entries because 54 and 55. So you can see publish successful, and it'll basically just add those two into our cash position. So if I can, so I think we had the week of, yeah, so you can just see here those two that we put in. So yeah, I mean that's pretty much a high level overview here of what we can do with the cash flow forecasting. Like I said, there's lots of, we can really play with it and get into the details. There's a lot of new features coming out with the financial insights. It's that AI modeling that can be really helpful, particularly when it comes to creating a budget for the new year and comparing a cash flow and using that budget for cash flow forecasting, and then also for credit and collections. Predicting, okay, when are we going to actually receive payment from the customer, based on maybe that person's history, maybe, yeah, et cetera, et cetera. So I think the other thing we wanted to talk about today is the year-end close. So I'll just go over there and we'll start with that. So the first thing for the year-end close is the period close workspace. So this is a workspace that you can use not just for year-end close, but really for any period end close process. If you're closing your inventory, for the month, etc. And it's pretty customizable. So let me go ahead and change this to USMF. So essentially, what we can do with this is create tasks and then assign them out to people in our departments across the organization, and as they complete those tasks, it'll slowly get to where we can actually close out our period, or in this case, be prepared to run our year-end close process. You can see the status by person. So for example, if I click on this person right here, I can see, okay, this person has these outstanding tasks. We also have a due date of when that can actually be done, or when they should be completed. Also status by area, which is helpful. So basically, we can see for accounts receivable, accounts payable, or different modules throughout the system. So this isn't required per se. You don't have to have 100% complete on all tasks to actually run the year-end close, but it can be helpful, just to bring awareness that this is out there, and it can be really helpful to use. Again, not just for year-end, but also for month-end. So with that being said, go ahead and look at the year-end close setup. So the first thing to note for year-end close is our parameters. So I'll go to general ledger parameters. Yep, down here. So we have our fiscal year close. So basically there's, our fiscal year close, delete existing year-end entries. So essentially, if we want to rerun the year-end close, say there are transactions, that we need to adjust, et cetera, et cetera, I think it's a good idea to keep the delete the existing year-end entries, and that allows us to rerun our year-end close, so we can make those adjustments a little bit easier, and we don't have to constantly go back and change things. The create closing transactions. So that essentially is, do you want to close out, create closing transactions for your P&L and transfer those to your retained earnings, and then your P&L is 0 for the next year. Generally, these two are set to yes. We can also set the fiscal year status to permanently close, but again, sometimes it's maybe not the best idea to do. because a month later something could come up where we need to change transactions in the previous period, even if we already have run the year-end close. So that's why sometimes it's a good idea to just keep that to no, and that allows us to rerun the year-end close. So it's kind of just something to note. So going up to the period close, just go to the year-end close here. So before I run the year-end close, it's based off a template that we can set up. So I'll go ahead and show you that. So essentially it just shows us where retained earnings are, and we can define that here. Well, we also need to define our retained earnings in our accounts for automatic transactions. So if I go to ledger setup, so our posting type year-end result, we need to make sure that we've put our retained earnings there as well. So once we defined our retained earnings for legal entity, we have options here to transfer the balance sheet dimensions into the new year. Yes is what we have it on right now. It'll basically if you have that off, it'll set your balance sheet accounts to 0, and it will not keep your financial dimensions from your previous year. The same can be said for the profit and loss. So you can define that by each financial dimension. If you have close all, it will keep your previous financial dimensions all into that retained earnings with the financial dimensions from the PL. So if for example, if we changed it to close single, it would summarize those financial dimension transaction for P&L into a new single financial dimension in the retained earnings. So once you are comfortable with that, we can go ahead and validate a year-end close. And use our 2018 demo data. So this is going to be your voucher that will show up for your closing and opening transactions. So a batch job will be created. It might take a second here. So another thing to kind of note here is that we can reverse the year-end close, and it's relative, because of our selection in the GL setup. It allows it so we can just completely reverse the year-end close and opening balances, and this kind of can be helpful because, like I said, as things change and maybe you want to, as more information comes in and you have to post things to December 20th, for example, if you've already closed the year, etc., then it becomes much more difficult to make those adjustment transactions, and you can't. So just go ahead wait for that batch job to run. Okay, so you can see that it's processed here. If I did want to reverse it, I can simply click the reverse year-end close. For another thing too is if we want to see if you want to see the different scenarios and transactions that are generated, there is a year-end transactions report that can be very helpful. So if I just go to increasing report, start period and reports, closing your transactions report. So I'll just go ahead and do the end date of that we just ran. So the cover page is helpful because, like, kind of what I was talking about earlier is showing you guys the GL setup. It will show, okay, these are the transactions that were generated with these year-end close parameters. So I'm gonna go ahead and click OK. Yeah, so you can see here our summary page here, and it just goes over, kind of the setup that we were going over earlier, and it tells us our details of, this is what the system was told to do. You have the delete opening transactions during transfer, and then we are creating closing transactions during transfer, and then our retained earnings. Another thing too, if you're not using it, this is very helpful for reports throughout the system. SSRS reports, which is what this is we can export this to Excel. So here's our summary page, and then we have our full list here of transactions that we went over. And again, close that out. So it'll detail all of our opening transactions and then also our closing transactions. Another thing to note is the voucher that we typed in when we ran the year-end close. That will be the voucher, the voucher used for these opening and closing transactions identified. Another thing to note is, our financial dimensions. You'll notice that our financial dimensions are all being transferred over in the ledger account. So if you recall, when we were setting up the year-end close dimensions, we asked for those financial dimensions to actually be transferred over. That's probably, it's more helpful. You can identify that. It's purely up to you. If you're not already familiar, there's the trial balance here out of the box that you can run. So and you can set, our dates. It's not really. We have transactions that are after because we're not. It's a dim environment, so we're not closing our ledger periods. But so if you want to, go see those transactions, you can our trial balance here. Another thing to note, if you're not already familiar, and you didn't automatically set your previous ledgers to closed, you can go do that under the year-end close period close task here. So in ledger calendars and fiscal calendars. So you can update our period status. Let's see, their USMF. And another thing too is, if you want to update a module status to be closed for all transactions related to that module, that can also be done here. Again, this is just kind of general period and close functionality. So that really kind of just concludes the high level, overview. We wanted to bring awareness around mainly the cash flow forecasting and how that can be used, and then also, using the period close workspace and running that year-end close. Sometimes people can run that and get stuck because they need to make lots of adjusting transactions, and it can kind of become a mess. Nothing's ever perfect the first time, so it's kind of just want to point out that you can reverse these closing and opening transactions based off your general ledger setup, etc. So yeah, I think that's pretty much it from our high level overview today.
Yeah, thanks, Charles. That was great. Just go ahead and always contact us on our website. That's the link right there, Turnkey Tech /contact us with any questions or to schedule a meeting to go over any more of these features or anything like that. So that is at your disposal. But yeah, if there are no questions, that wraps up for us. We appreciate you guys joining, and have a good rest of your day.